The sun was a hammer over the dusty outpost of Redemption Creek, Texas. It beat down on the raw lumber of the trading post, the hitching rails, and the cracked earth of the main street, baking the very air until it felt brittle. It was the kind of heat that dried up mercy. I rode in slow, my horse, Silas, kicking up lazy clouds of red dust. My name is Jonah, and I've learned in 40 years of drifting that you can tell the character of a town not by its church steeple, but by the quality of its silence. And the silence in Redemption Creek was mean. It clung to the spaces between the jeers of the half-dozen men loitering outside the general store. They were watching something at the hitching post, their laughter sharp and cruel like shattered glass. I didn't want to know. Trouble you don't go looking for has a way of finding you anyway. My plan was simple: get my supplies and be gone before sundown. But a man makes plans, and God, or the devil, laughs. As I drew closer, I saw what held their attention. It wasn't a horse they were tormenting. It was a person, a woman, an Apache girl no older than 20, slumped against the wood. Her hands were bound tight to the post with thick rope. Her traditional buckskin dress was torn, caked with dirt and streaks of dried blood. And she was pregnant, her condition a soft, vulnerable curve against the hard lines of her suffering. A crudely painted sign hung around her neck, the words of venomous scrawl: "Savages get no mercy." The rest of the sentence was obscured by a dark splatter. I didn't need to read it. Something cold and old settled in my gut. I'd seen the worst of men in my time, in war, in boom towns, in the desperate places civilization forgot. But this was sport. Their taunts were low, meant only for her, a slow poison of words to match the work they'd already done with a whip. My hand instinctively went to the coat peacemaker holstered on my hip, not to draw it, but to feel its solid weight. A reminder of the finality that lived in that cold steel. A reminder of the choices a man has to make. One of the men, a portly fellow with a sweat-stained hat, tossed a stone that clattered near her feet. She didn't flinch. She just stared out at the unforgiving horizon, her face a mask of profound exhaustion. Her spirit retreated somewhere deep inside where they couldn't reach it. There were old scars on her face. Silvery lines that spoke of a hard life long before this day. This was just another chapter in a book of pain. I dismounted, the squeak of my leather boots silencing their laughter. 6 pairs of eyes turned to me, hostile and questioning. "Just passing through, stranger," the portly man grunted, his hand resting on the butt of a pistol tucked into his belt. The others shifted, creating a loose, challenging semicircle. I ignored them. My focus was on her. I walked past them, my steps deliberate, closing the distance to the post. The stench of sweat, whiskey, and blood hung heavy in the air. I saw her up close now. Her breathing was shallow, her dark eyes clouded with a pain so deep it seemed ancient. But beneath it, a spark, a single defiant ember refusing to be extinguished. "She's with me." The words were quiet, but they landed like stones in that tense silence. The portly man spat a brown stream of tobacco juice into the dust. "The hell she is. She belongs to the town. A lesson for her kind." I didn't argue. Arguing with a mob is like trying to reason with a flash flood. It only understands force. I pulled my knife from its sheath on my belt. It wasn't a fighting knife, but its edge was razor sharp. I started sawing at the ropes binding her wrists. The men took a step forward, their hands now on their weapons. The air grew thick, humming with the promise of violence. I could feel the crosshairs of their hatred on my back. I knew what this meant. In my younger days, I lived for this feeling, the lightning-fast calculus of a life-or-death moment. I'd made my name in places like this, a name whispered in saloons and dusty trails, a name I'd tried to bury for 10 years. But some things you can't outrun.
Some things, like a man's own soul, follow you, and mine wouldn't let me walk away from this. The last strand of rope snapped. Her arms fell limp to her sides. She swayed and I caught her, her weight surprisingly light. I lifted her into my arms. Her head rested against my shoulder, a sigh escaping her lips, so faint it was more a feeling than a sound. For a heartbeat, no one moved. It was just us, an island in a sea of hate. The townsmen looked at each other, waiting for someone else to make the first move. They were bullies, not warriors, brave in a pack, but cowards alone. I turned and walked toward my horse. Her body was a fragile weight, a testament to their cruelty. I could feel the burn of their gazes. I lifted her onto Silas, placing her gently in the saddle before mounting behind her, my arms securely around her waist. She was barely conscious. "You'll regret this, stranger," the portly man called out, his voice filled with impotent rage. I looked back at them, my eyes lingering on each face, memorizing them. "I already do," I said, my voice flat. "I regret letting men like you breathe this long." I turned Silas and nudged him into a slow walk, away from the trading post, away from the town. Every instinct screamed at me to ride hard and fast, but I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me run. We rode out of Redemption Creek with as much dignity as I could muster, a wounded Apache girl in my arms and the unspoken promise of a storm to come. We rode for an hour before I found a place to make camp, a small hidden grove of cottonwood trees near a trickle of a stream, shielded by a rock outcropping. The sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of bruised purple and blood orange. I laid her down on my bedroll, her body trembling slightly. I took my canteen and gently moistened a cloth, dabbing at the cuts on her face and arms. The wounds from the whip on her back were angry and raw. They needed more than water. For a long time, she didn't speak. I built a small, smokeless fire, using the skills I learned a lifetime ago. I made a thin broth from some dried jerky, hoping she could keep it down. When I brought it to her, her eyes fluttered open. They were deep and dark, and in them I saw a history of pain that made the last few hours look like a scratch. She tried to sit up, a wince of pain crossing her face. "Easy now," I said softly. "You're safe here. For now." Her eyes searched my face, looking for the lie, the trap. She had been given no reason to trust a white man, and plenty of reasons to fear them. "Why?" she whispered, her voice raspy, barely audible. It was the first word she had spoken. It was a good question. Why had I done it? Why had I just made myself the enemy of an entire town for a stranger? 10 years ago, the answer would have been simple, pride or a quick trigger finger. But now the reasons were quieter, more complicated. They were tangled up in the memory of a wife I couldn't save, and a past I couldn't forget. I didn't answer her directly. Instead, I held the cup of broth to her lips. "Drink," I said. "We'll need our strength. They'll be coming." She drank, her eyes never leaving my face. Trust wasn't a currency she possessed, but survival was. After she finished the broth, she lay back down, her body finally succumbing to an exhausted sleep. I sat by the fire, my Colt in my lap, listening to the sounds of the night. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves sent a jolt through me. They wouldn't come at night, not the whole mob. Mobs are creatures of daylight and whiskey courage. But one or two might get bold, the ones who felt their pride was most wounded. Men like that are as predictable as the sunrise. I took out an old, worn tin from my saddlebag. Inside was a salve made from comfrey and yarrow, something my wife, Sarah, had taught me how to make. She had a way with growing things, a gentleness that seemed to coax life from the harsh Texas soil. I remembered her hands, covered in dirt, tending to her garden. It was a lifetime ago. With the utmost care, I treated the girl's wounds, my touch as gentle as I could manage. Her skin was hot to the touch. The infection was already setting in. As the first light of dawn filtered through the cottonwood leaves, she stirred. She was watching me, her gaze clear and sharp, the exhaustion replaced by a quiet watchfulness. "They will hunt you," she said, her voice stronger now. It wasn't a warning, it was a statement of fact. "Let 'em," I replied, feeding a few more sticks into the fire. "Means I won't have to go looking for them." She pushed herself into a sitting position, her movements slow and deliberate. She looked at the treated wounds on her arms, then met my eyes. "You are not like the others," she said. "Don't be so sure," I grunted. "I've been one of the others." It was true. The man I was a decade ago would have been right there in that crowd, if not leading it. A gunslinger's reputation is built on a foundation of fear, and fear is a close cousin to cruelty. Sarah had changed that, or she'd tried to. Her death had been the final, brutal lesson. You can't protect the good in the world by becoming part of the bad. For 2 days we stayed in that grove. I hunted a small jackrabbit, making a more substantial stew. She began to heal. Her name was Istas, which she said meant snow in her language. She spoke of her people, driven from their lands, scattered like seeds in the wind. Her husband, a warrior named Taza, had been killed a month prior to settlers who wanted their small patch of land. She was alone, trying to make her way to the reservation in the north before the baby came. She had stopped in Redemption Creek for water. It was a mistake that nearly cost her everything. "And you?" she asked, her eyes searching mine. "Who do you run from?" "Myself, mostly," I admitted, the truth of it tasting like ash in my mouth. I told her about Sarah, about the fever that took her, about the town doctor who was too drunk to help, about the rage that had consumed me, the fire that had burned that doctor's office to the ground with him inside it. I told her about the bounty on my head, the reason I lived on the fringes, the reason my name was still whispered with fear. Jonah the Ghost, a name I'd earned and a past I could never escape. Sharing that story with her, that piece of my broken past, felt strange. It wasn't absolution. It wasn't forgiveness. It was just a shared quiet in the vast, lonely expanse of the West. 2 broken people hiding from a world that had tried to crush them. The community of the wounded, a bond forged in shared pain. On the 3rd morning, as I was scouting the ridge, I saw them. A dust cloud in the distance. 3 riders, coming fast. I hurried back to camp. "They're here," I said, my voice low and urgent. 3 of them. Istas's face tightened, but she didn't panic. She had the calm of someone who had lived with danger her entire life. She started gathering our meager supplies, her movements efficient and purposeful. I knew this terrain. There was a narrow path through the rocks a mile north, barely wide enough for a single horse. It was our only chance. We rode hard. The pass was a jagged scar in the rock, a bottleneck designed by nature. I sent Istas and Silas through first. "Keep going," I commanded. "Don't stop until you reach the river." She looked back at me, her dark eyes filled with a fear that wasn't for herself. "Go," I said, my voice harsher than I intended. She nodded and disappeared into the pass.
I dismounted and led my spare horse, Bess, into a small alcove hidden from view. I took my rifle from its scabbard and found a high ledge that gave me a clear view of the entrance to the pass. And I waited. The three riders slowed as they approached, their caution a testament to their fear. The portly man from town was one of them. The other two were hired guns. I could tell by the way they moved, the way their eyes scanned the rocks, looking for a trap. They were right to be cautious. They drew their pistols, entering the pass slowly. They were fools. They'd split their focus, looking left and right, never thinking to look up. My first shot took the lead rider out of his saddle. The crack of the rifle echoed through the canyon, a sharp, clean sound. The other two panicked, firing wildly at shadows. My second shot caught the portly man in the shoulder, spinning him off his horse. He screamed, a high, thin sound that was swallowed by the rocks. The last man, the real professional, dove for cover. He was smart. He knew where I was now. We exchanged fire for what felt like an eternity. Bullets ricocheted around me, spitting rock fragments. I was pinned down. I had underestimated him. He was methodically working his way up the rocks, moving from cover to cover. Then a sound behind me. A footstep on loose gravel. I spun, my Colt already in my hand, my thumb pulling back the hammer. It was Istis. She held a large rock in her hands, her face a mask of fierce determination. She hadn't run, she had circled back. She pointed with her chin to the ledge above the hired gun's position. An idea, a desperate gamble, passed between us without a word. I gave her a sharp nod. I laid down a volley of covering fire, forcing the gunman to stay put. He fired back, the bullets thudding into the rock just inches from my head. Under the cover of the gunfire, Istis scrambled up the steep incline like a mountain cat, her movements sure and silent. She reached the ledge directly above him. With a primal scream, a sound of rage and grief and righteous fury, she heaved the rock over the edge. It struck the gunman squarely in the back. He crumbled without a sound, his body tumbling down the rocks. Silence descended on the canyon, broken only by the moans of the wounded man and the whistling of the wind. Istis slid down the rocks, her breathing heavy. We stood there, in the quiet aftermath of the battle, two survivors against a brutal world. She had saved my life, and I suppose, had saved hers. The scales were balanced. We left the wounded man, let his friends come for him, or let the coyotes. Mercy was a luxury we couldn't afford. We rode north, pushing hard, putting as much distance as we could between us and Redemption Creek. For the first time in 10 years, I wasn't riding alone. And for the first time in a long time, the future didn't feel like just a string of empty sunrises. It felt like a possibility, a second chance, bought with blood and courage, in a lonely canyon.
The next week was a blur of hard riding and quiet camps. We pushed north, following the faint whisper of the Rio Grande. We spoke little, but the silence between us was different now. It wasn't the empty, desolate silence of loneliness. It was a shared silence, comfortable and solid. I watched her, this woman of quiet strength, and I saw a resilience I hadn't witnessed since Sarah. She never complained, despite the pain she must have been in. She was a survivor, forged in the crucible of a land that was stolen from her people. We found a small, abandoned line shack tucked away in a high mountain valley, a place the world had forgotten. The roof was sound, and a clear stream ran nearby. We decided to rest there, to let Istas regain her strength before the final push to the reservation. For a few days, a semblance of peace settled over us. I hunted, she prepared the food. In the evenings we would sit by the fire, and she would tell me stories of the Apache, of the spirits of the mountains and the wisdom of the elders. I learned that true wisdom isn't found in books or sermons, but in the deep, quiet understanding of the world that comes from a life lived close to the bone. It's the kind of knowledge that can't be taught, only earned through hardship. In her presence, the ghost of Jonah the ghost, the feared gunslinger, began to fade. I was just Jonah again, a man. One who had made more mistakes than he could count, but maybe, just maybe, had a chance to make one right. It was a novel feeling, hope. One evening, as the stars blazed in the vast dark sky, she placed her hand on her stomach, a soft, sad smile on her face. "He will be born in a free land," she said, more to herself than to me. "He will know the stories of his people." I nodded, understanding the weight of that simple statement. It was a promise, a legacy, a defiance against a world that had tried to erase her. Our peace was shattered 3 days later. They had been tracking us. Not the men from Redemption Creek. These were bounty hunters, professionals. There were 5 of them, and they had us surrounded. "Jonah the ghost!" their leader shouted, his voice echoing in the valley. "The bounty on you is $1,000. Come out with your hands up, and we'll let the squaw live." I looked at Istas. The fear was back in her eyes, but it was overshadowed by a fierce, protective fire. I knew it was a lie. They would kill us both, but it was a trap I had to walk into. "Stay inside," I told her, checking my Colt, my rifle. "Bar the door." "I will not hide while you die for me," she said, her voice low and steady. "I'm not dying for you," I said, meeting her gaze. "I'm dying for me, for the chance to do one right thing." Before I could step outside, the first shot splintered the doorframe. The siege had begun. They were professionals, and they were patient. They kept us pinned down, content to wait us out. But I was a professional, too. The shack had a small root cellar, its entrance hidden under a loose floorboard. Sarah had loved root cellars. During the lull in the shooting, I showed it to Istas. "There's a tunnel," I whispered, pulling back the floorboard. "It comes out in the rocks behind the shack. Go, now." "No," she said, shaking her head. "I will not leave you." "Istas," I said, my voice cracking with an emotion I hadn't felt in a decade. "Live! For him!" I touched her stomach gently. "Tell him the stories. That's all that matters." Tears streamed down her face, but she nodded. She understood. This wasn't about surrender. This was about survival. This was about the future. She squeezed my hand. A silent thank you, a silent goodbye. Then she disappeared into the darkness of the tunnel. I reloaded my weapons. I was no longer Jonah, the ghost, the feared gunslinger running from his past. I was just Jonah, a man standing his ground, a man who had found something worth defending. And in that small, besieged shack, surrounded by men who wanted me dead, I felt a strange sense of peace. My redemption wasn't in living. It was in this choice. I kicked open the door and stepped out into the blinding sunlight, my Colt and my rifle blazing. I would not die cowering in a shack. I would die on my feet. I would die a man. I took 2 of them down before the 3rd bullet caught me in the chest, stealing my breath, sending me to my knees. The world went hazy, the sounds of the gunfight fading into a dull roar. As the darkness closed in, my last thought was of Istas, of her baby, of a future I would not see, but one I had helped to create. I opened my eyes. The first thing I saw was the familiar pattern of the cracks on my own cabin ceiling. The smell of burning juniper and sage filled the air. A dream? I tried to sit up, but a sharp pain lanced through my chest. "Be still," a soft voice commanded. Istas. She was sitting in a chair by my bed, grinding herbs in a stone bowl. My chest was tightly bandaged. I was weak, confused. "How?" She explained. "My people found us. After you fell. They were watching. The bounty hunters did not see them." She paused, her dark eyes meeting mine. There were no survivors. She had led her people back for me. For the next month, she and an Apache elder nursed me back to health. They were healers of a kind I had never known, mending not just the bullet wound, but the deeper wounds in my soul. I learned to be quiet, to listen, to see the world not as a thing to be conquered, but as a living spirit to be respected. The ghost of my past finally, truly died. When I was strong enough to walk, the Apache prepared to leave, their work done. Istas came to me as I stood by the door of my cabin, watching the sun rise over the mountains. "Will you go with them?" I asked, my heart a leaden weight in my chest. She looked out at the valley, then back at me. "My path is with my people, but," she hesitated, "a warrior needs a home to return to." She didn't have to say more. It was an invitation, a beginning. As they rode out, she looked back one last time, a small smile on her face. I stood there, watching until they were specks on the horizon. I was alone again, but not lonely. I was a man with a past, but now for the first time, I was also a man with a future. A future where I might not have to be a ghost anymore. A future waiting for a warrior's return. And for the first time, in a very, very long time, I believed I deserved it. If this story of redemption and courage moved you, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It keeps you right here with us, where stories of the Old West remind us not only of who we were, but who we can still choose to be.